Now, delighted to introduce Mary Pickering. So Mary is the VP of Strategy and Partnerships for the Atmospheric Fund, is also on special assignment as a senior advisor with Low Carbon Cities Canada, LC3 for short. So just quickly on who the Atmospheric Fund, or TAF, is. So TAF works to drive down carbon in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. We've been doing this work for a long time, have been hugely successful. And as we're going to learn more about it today, LC3 is I would describe it just like a fascinating, really commendable project that brings in part TAF's model and learning to cities across Canada, and is about kind of enabling accelerated scale up of low carbon solutions while also delivering community benefits that are, catered to the communities that they're operating in a very equitable way. So that's LC3. Mary has been leading collective impact and partnership initiatives for TAF for over 20 years. She's also an accredited partnership broker, mentor, and a trainer for the International Partnership Brokers Association. And as we were chatting earlier, I've heard about Mary for a long time. She's brilliant, and we're just delighted to have her. So thanks so much for joining us, Mary. And moderating our conversation is Stefan Hostetter. So Stefan and I get to work together at CSI. Stefan's our community manager with CSI and manages our Spadina location in downtown Toronto. And he's been a climate activist and advocate for years. He supports, particularly at CSI, our Spadina community, but also like our community of innovators and entrepreneurs in so many ways, and it's a delight to work with him. He's also the co-chair of the Toronto Climate Action Network and co-host of The Green Majority. If you haven't heard of it, it's amazing. Listen to it. It's a nationally syndicated, environmentally focused radio show. And he also does many other things. So that's Stefan. If that's all right with you, Stefan, I'm going to pitch it over to you. Oh, no, wait, I forgot two things. We wanted to break up with our format just a little bit. So we do want to hear questions from you, but as well, we have questions for the group. So two on our mind, and we're going to come back to this. We're going to pose it in the chat, and we want to hear reflections and comments from you. The first, what role can entrepreneurs play in supporting systems change for achieving full adoption of climate solutions? We know that many of you would identify as entrepreneurs and working with startups, and that's kind of the focus of LC3 in particular. So that's one question for you. And then another, how can LC3, as you learn more about it, and others better equip and support entrepreneurs to help accelerate climate and other social outcomes? So those are our two questions for you that we'll come back to at the end. Okay, and now enough of me. Over to you, Stefan.
Thank you so much. I am super excited to be able and get to welcome Mary, who I learned earlier today has been working with the Center for Social Innovation on climate issues well before myself. I've been here, or almost 10 years now, I believe, was the first time that we collaborated. So super excited to hear from all the information, and really, and on an auspicious day, given that earlier today, the price on carbon in Canada was deemed constitutional, and so federal action lives to see another day. So with that, but we want to start with a very sort of simple opening, Mary, which is because we've moved online, everything is now national. Where are you joining us from?
Hi, everybody. It's really nice to be here today, Stefan. Thanks for asking me. And I'm joining you from Nogojiwanong, Peterborough, Ontario, place at the base of the rapids, and it's territory of Haudenosaunee and Mississauga peoples. And I've just recently moved to this place, and I've had the opportunity to participate in some local action around climate, which is got a very strong Indigenous leadership. And it just reminds me and reinforces to me how that tradition focuses on the wholeness of things. And I want to bear that in mind today, because I think social ventures, social entrepreneurs brings circles together in that kind of way. And that's what's really special about it to me.
For sure. I look forward to that expansion. I know we're sort of heading in that direction, but to provide a bit of context for people who, in an entry point into this discussion, I'm wondering if you can tell us how you got into working on climate in cities and markets.
Yeah, my career started actually as a marketing person in a home energy audit service agency. So I started there, and later on I moved to World Wildlife Fund Canada, and I was a fundraiser working to raise money for conservation across Canada and the Endangered Species campaign. And ultimately, I think what I learned there is that in the everything connected theme is that I had a chance to go to the Arctic, work with Indigenous leaders there who were doing testing of toxics. And you realize this problem isn't starting here. This is where the manifestation is. The problem or the challenge that we have is in cities. So ultimately, you know, somebody coming from an environmental background, ultimately, I think cities are so important. We know that more and more. They become a center for knowledge around and action around climate. TAF started, you know, with a concept that the city should have a climate agency. It was unheard of, 1991. Now it's accepted knowledge. So that's the circle the path I've come to be in this sphere. And I joined the Atmospheric Fund in 2004, and I will say too that for the last 10 plus years, I've been an active member of Center for Social Innovation. It's really benefited me. And I brought, I think, some really important concepts into TAF's work. And so, yeah, I appreciate that. Good connections there.
Amazing. And yeah, to be honest, the fact that the Toronto Atmospheric Fund was able to start in the early 1990s has always blown me away. It was so ahead of its time at that moment and how it's managed to do things. And of course, it's now rebranded as the Atmospheric Fund as it expands its scope. And so, given that that's sort of, you know, as cities are so important, you know, more than half of humanity now lives in a city, and that number, to my understanding, is still growing, although we might have seen a slight dip due to COVID as people, you know, found themselves in their cottage homes. But the Atmospheric Fund has long been hailed as a program, you know, both ahead of its time and also one with a unique mandate, specifically where to try to reduce carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, and also where you could test a lot of different models because of the sort of way it works. And so I'm curious if you can sort of get into, you know, what were your biggest learnings there, or are and ongoing, as you're obviously still there.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we say about TAF is that it's a Swiss Army knife organization. So, you know, it has a lot of tools. It's a real advantage to be able to work in this way. We're you know, we're a city agency. That's how we started. We have government support, but we also work inside the community with all kinds of different players. We're an impact investor, work with financial players. We're down in the garage, underground parking garages. We're working with all kinds of people in different situations, and it gives us an opportunity to have all kinds of different perspectives in the work, and to have different tools that we use to engage people and to move forward. And I guess, you know, there's really, I would say, for my, you know, to encapsulate some of the lessons I've learned at TAF, maybe the first is about how important it is to stop and think about. We talk about reflective practice and how, you know, listen, we've been going at this work for some time. Myself personally, you know, it's coming on 3 decades and we haven't got it cracked. And sometimes you need to just stop what you're doing and, you know, reflect on what tools we're using. Are we asking the right questions? Are the things we're doing really working? And so I like how Frances Wesley says, and she's got this book, Getting to Maybe, she says, action is reflection and reflection is action. So we don't have to think that just because we want to stop and pursue something and learn from it, that we're stopping our work. It's all part of the work. And that's something I think I've really learned at TAF. And it's become a very important part of my practice, you know, and it means you have to stop things that aren't working, and that's surprisingly difficult to do. So there's some insight I've learned from TAF. I've had the opportunity to be in a learning agency like TAF. It's been great. The other thing you heard in my bio, I'm kind of big on the partnership stuff, and I took some training thanks to Social Innovation Generation and CSI, bringing this to Canada, partnership brokering. I've used it in my own practice. It's about the idea that our problems are so big that many times we can't solve it alone. And we have to work in collaboration with others, sometimes very diverse others. This is hard work and it needs skillful management. We don't just do this lightly. We don't enter into that kind of work lightly. And I've really learned how much professional support and attention this kind of work needs. So that's a key lesson for me. And finally, most recently, I'm thinking a lot about scale up, because as we brought Low Carbon Cities Canada into the fore, we had a lot of opportunity to discuss all our best practitioner colleagues across the country. We all were realizing that our work was flawed. We were looking at pilots, we were looking at tests. What was coming out of the end of our tube was proven solutions, but they weren't scaling up. We're not getting the impact that we need. And this takes very deliberate action. We've been thinking much more about this. We've shifted, low carbon city centers are modeled on TAF, but they've all shifted together with TAF to think about what do we need to do to enable scale up. We have so many solutions already for climate. What we need to do is scale them up so they move the dial. So thinking about shifting into that perspective has been one of the key lessons in my mind most recently with my TAF and Low Carbon Cities Canada work.
And that makes sense. And so I wonder if you can take a second to zoom back out a little bit to get a sense of why scale is so important right now. Give it, as you said, there's tons of options and ways we can tackle this, but scaling, I think, speaks to the moment we are in regards to the climate crisis. And so I'm wondering if you can give us your general take on this sort of current moment that we sit in from your perspective, as both a climate leader, but also someone who's seen the systems, over the last 3 decades. You have that historical context. And so how do you sort of see the moment we're in right now with the context of the climate crisis?
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. I guess I think I have 2 thoughts in mind, and they kind of conflict actually, and something I've tried to cultivate in my thinking is that, and this comes from partnership working as well, as like, it's okay if things don't always match up, if the ideas aren't always synchronized. There's actually some creativity in that. But like on the one side, we're at this threshold. If we don't get this cracked in 10 years, forget it. Like we have to position the scale for us to reach these targets by 2050. So, we're having a pandemic, and it's weirdly speeding up, seems to be speeding up people's commitment and concern about climate, maybe because it shows us things can go terribly wrong, and maybe now we realize, oh yeah, this could go terribly wrong. Sharpens the mind, the incrementalism hasn't been working. We need these bigger jumps. This is where the scaling idea comes in. So there's this urgency. There's urgency on the one hand. On the other hand, it's like, it's about this interconnection. Like more and more we understand, and these indigenous principles come into play. That's, traditional knowledge, everything's connected. We can't just go up one stream with our focus in, do the same thing we've been doing, harder, faster, no, it's not going to work. We realize, oh gosh, we've got to look at these more broadly. We have to think about multiple outcomes. We talk about multi-solving. That's a concept related to scale, because why? Not just because we have to solve everything at once, but because if we don't consider all the different elements, our single issues are likely to fail. Maybe we get one win. Maybe we lose it at the next election. We didn't build broad enough support. So we have to design to make these climate issues relevant, and that's slow. That's not fast. That's slow. That this partnering business, I was saying, that takes all kinds of skillful management, and we're talking to people we're not used to, different cultures. It's conflictual and messy. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking urgent, but this expanded context at the same time. And there's a lot of creativity in that, I think, and I think it is a good place to be, really. And but it makes things extra exciting for us when we're thinking, what do we do when we get to work on Monday?
Right. Yeah. And so let's dive into that. Because the fact that you have moved over to LC3, the Low Carbon Cities Canada. And I'm going to combine 2 questions here a little bit. I hope that's okay, because in our pre-chat, you sort of mentioned that that Low Carbon Cities Canada is still in its development phase, and so you're still you're working some things out and figuring out how you can best serve people and entrepreneurs. But also, I want to get at the bit you mentioned earlier in regards to this, and you just mentioned actually right now, which is about having to understand these co-benefits, or these ways in which climate action can serve not just greenhouse gas emissions, but equity and prosperity for more people, and housing issues, and all these other ways that this idea of co-benefits, which is coming from, it clearly has been, it's been growing as a need, I think, over the last 10 years, especially within the climate movement. And so the question is both, what is Low Carbon Cities Canada, just as an opening question, what's your mandate, but then also, what are the major KPIs that you're tracking, and why do you see them as important?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Low Carbon Cities Canada is a network of agencies in 7 cities across Canada, with some of the largest city regions, including Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Halifax. And this has come from, several years of work, people coming together. That's a whole other interview. How that came about, the partnership that evolved, and all the support we had and creativity along the way, including with our partner at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, who hosts us. This has 2 ideas in it. It has the idea that it's modeled on the TAF model. So my organization is kind of the model, but as I said, we're moving on from that too. These are dedicated in perpetuity endowments, makes the agencies independent. They have local governance. So they're very embedded in their own communities and responding there, but they're also networked across the nation in basically a learning network that's hosted at the national office. They make decisions together. They gather up their intelligence from the grassroots and analyze it for lessons and impact. And it's like a scale methodology, because different areas of the country are doing a lot better job on various different kinds of climate actions. And so they can take the lead on that, and with the idea in mind that they're trying to design for scale out across multiple cities. So we're trying to prototype and scale across different things, make things go a bit faster. And our mandate is to enable climate action at scale. So we're not implementing it. We're not the implementers. We're small. A lot of the organizations are quite small, especially now. They've got strategies for growing their resources, but they're just getting started, and they're going to grow over time. But their superpowers are they're going to work with all different types of communities. They have this independent resource, and they all have their own Swiss Army knives of tools, different kinds of tools, so they can do what is needed. Just on the key performance indicators, we're working on that right now. It's what part of my role is to work with the whole Low Carbon Cities executive team and all the new amazing executive directors across the country. And we're thinking about shared parameters. So like to help have some consistency for learning, while we keep a little flexibility at the local level at the same time. And we've identified 4 lenses. This will all sound very familiar, I think, based on where things have been going. First one, of course, is we're looking for significant carbon reduction opportunities. We have a way of calculating that, looking out 20 years, we're looking at the potential of something at scale to give a significant reduction. We know what these things are in cities. Many of us here, we will know all those things. It's about buildings, it's about electrification of everything, it's about waste reduction. And so we analyze that as a key lens, but we think about how the activities on those important high impact low carbon pathways are being positioned for scale. So this whole idea of designing for scale, what does that mean? What does that look like? When you design for scale, what's different about that? And so we'll be assessing the ability of the project at hand to scale. And then the third indicator is about community benefits, which actually is related to scale because of what I said before. We're building broader constituents of support. We can't get away anymore with just going in different silos. We've got to weave these strands together, make them stronger. And so we're always going to be looking for how could we design these climate actions to do more, more than the sum of the parts work, to contribute to some issues in our cities, which frankly may be more top of mind to a lot more people than reducing carbon. And so it makes it more relevant. So we're going to be looking for those opportunities. And when we find them, we're going to be applying a 4th lens, which is how could these benefits be most equitably distributed? So the carbon, the scale, the benefits, and the equity, those are the 4 lenses we're going to be using and applying to our work and our strategies.
Amazing. And so when we had our pre-conversation, one of the things I was super interested in was this distinction you made about scale in terms of when low carbon cities might think about scale versus say when a traditional accelerator might think about scale. And specifically the distinction there that we discussed was when you talk about scale, you're thinking of scale in terms of impact of greenhouse gas emissions. How do you design for scale in that terms? Whereas, commercialization, there might be a great business idea out there, but if it doesn't reduce impact, if it might make a bunch of money, but if it's not going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then that's not useful scale in the terms that you're sort of discussing. So I'm wondering if you can sort of parse that out. What's the difference between those two things, and how do you see that?
Yeah, well, I had an example for you maybe to talk about that. Scale is a definable term, I guess. Like, what are you talking about? What's the scope here? Are we talking about my neighborhood or my community or whatever? Are we talking about a single activity or something that tips the whole system to make a transformational change? So there's all kinds of different lenses. But supposing you have someone who's a entrepreneurial real estate developer, and they've found that they can build lovely homes that are low carbon, and they have renewable energy embedded, and they have low waste systems, and they market those successfully. They've discovered there's a niche market of people who are green-minded and are willing to pay, or really interested in buying this product. And they knock out their competitors and they move it along, and they make, get across Canada, make a lot of these homes in this niche market. I mean, you could say, well, they're bringing more high-performing energy homes into the residential sector. They're creating renewable energy sources locally and making a great business, making some money. And they've scaled the service to the niche market across Canada. So you could say, well, that's success, because and the more houses they sell like that, the more the impact. But then I would say, well, when I'm analyzing that with my scale hat on, I'm thinking, yes, however, how much renewable energy do we need to displace dirty energy from our grid? And is it going to be enough to do it this way? And is it okay to have just a niche market? How could we be using that? Is there a way we could have designed that entrepreneurial effort to proactively demonstrate the business case for this kind of housing and basically show how profitable it is, so that others would get into the market and eat your lunch by taking the market wider? And maybe we can think, how can we use policy we are doing this now, green standards policy, to make it a requirement that all the new housing be built to this standard. And then you're creating a massive market. It goes across the whole market, not just the niche market. And by the way, is the utility able to take these new renewable energy sources into the grid? Because we haven't redesigned the grid. So we have to think about that system. There's just this bigger context for really moving it. Like, we're talking about getting all our housing down to zero. So it doesn't really help in the grander scheme of things to work in a niche market. So it's about thinking about the whole system and what kind of contribution, and designed well. I do believe that entrepreneurial efforts can be critical and extremely useful to unlocking these scale up opportunities, to show, shining a light on things, to creating constituencies of support. And one thing we talked about, Stefan and I, it's in my mind, I'll just put the question out there. The thing about classic entrepreneurialism is that you create something great, and it's your intellectual property, and you patent it or whatever, and you hold on to it so only you can use it and profit from it. But that's kind of antithetical to scale, isn't it, in terms of scaling out a social benefit, where you want somebody, you're like, steal this idea, because we want everybody using it to push it out harder. So it's a bit of an internal challenge with the approach, perhaps.
For sure. And clearly from your work and what you just said, the part of this question is the system that these entrepreneurial efforts are a part of. And that, that any individual entrepreneur is sort of bound in some ways by the system and the leverage points that sort of exist or don't exist within that systemic view. And so I'm curious if in your mind, as again, you have 30 years of viewing this, and the last 17 or so with Toronto Atmospheric Fund, or the Atmospheric Fund. What are the big leverage points that you see right now? When thinking of carbon or greenhouse gases as a system, where are those leverage points that you think are most critical right now?
I find that's a hard question to answer because there's so many leverage points, and that's, the answer is it depends. It depends, like, what are you doing and what's gapped, and so you do need to, you have the different tools and then you need to apply them appropriately. And by the way, I guess one thing I've learned from thinking about scale up is you usually need a whole bunch of tools all happening at once. So we can talk about there's social change. What's the attitude towards car sharing, co-living, being vegan? There's policy change. So are we creating an economic bonus or premium for a carbon tax? Are we making a law that says it has to be built to a certain standard? There's crises. Like, good crisis is a bad thing to waste, right? So are people shifting and changing and disrupting our behaviors, creating new opportunities we would have never seen before? We're in that situation right now. Technical breakthroughs, good battery storage system, cold weather heat pumps, whatever, cheaper production methods, social innovation, sharing economy, and there's institutional. The other thing is there's institutional levers. Actually, some of these are really pretty powerful, and they're not very exciting, but they're really impactful. Community benefits agreement might be an institutional method you could use to drive entrepreneurial opportunities within a large government investment, or even flexible procurement methods by government to allow smaller entrepreneurs to come into the system market for us. Anyway, all these things, they're all part of the levers. And of course, maybe the last one and most top of mind one, of course, always is politics. So we need to look at all, it's just the point is we need to look at all those things and think about what we need to shift in order to move things forward. And it's about having a sense of this, of having to take a more bird's eye view when we think about where we're positioning our work.
So I'm going to hop ahead to a question because I want to make sure I get to it before 12:45 when we'll go to general questions, and then we'll come back to some of these other ones that we've discussed. But I would love to know if you have any surprising problems that you found needed to get solved. Like as someone who sort of sees a system, and you said not all of them are maybe the most flashy, but they're real problems and significant issues that if solved could be really unlocking to the larger system. So I'm wondering if you have any examples of those sort of surprising problems that you're like, oh wow, doing this actually has a much greater impact than what we would have known if we weren't at this sort of systems level view.
Now, the problems don't surprise me anymore anyway. There's always problems. That's what we say. Oh, if it's not really hard and fraught with problems, then we're probably focused on the wrong thing. But anyway, yes, I have some examples for you. Like we could talk about financial aggregation, and these are different types of entrepreneurial effort too, right? We often think, oh, we're making sometimes, we're making a product and it's overcoming, or we're finding a product or service. But, there's so many opportunities now. People want to invest their money. We want to mobilize capital into low carbon solutions, but there aren't the vehicles there. Like there's a lot of little projects, and these entrepreneurs like CoPower and SolarShare, they're aggregating solar projects into big lumps so that people can easily put their money there. And it's a great innovation, and it solves this aggregation problem. Kevin McLaughlin, from AutoShare, that was an early investment with TAF, a small investment right at the beginning to help him do all the great things he did. But, how can we get people to share cars and share vehicles and let go of the idea of, that's a social innovation too, that you don't have to have a private vehicle, you can share it. And all the innovation that goes into that, that's a problem to overcome that, and to all the way through to the auto sharing we had a few years ago, like they want status to be able to park the cars on the street so people can have easy access. That's an innovation in the whole parking regime. So there's some challenges like that. There's some things about these multi-solving opportunities where I think there could be lots of challenge in that. I mentioned we're trying to solve, eat and chew gum, walk and chew gum. So how might we design, we need all this new EV infrastructure. How might we design it in a way that creates emergency backup power, readiness, maybe especially in vulnerable communities. We have a huge problem with towers in Toronto that are very vulnerable to power outages. They've got a lot of, senior population in there. They don't have cooling and so forth. So thinking about the innovation and entrepreneurial nature of putting things together. Community Benefits Network is an amazing organization, I think, and very entrepreneurial about how to redirect big public spending in ways that create creative opportunities at the local level. So in the multi-solving area, there's lots of creativity for finding problems, matching things up, and sometimes we run into things, like we did a solar neighborhoods pilot. To pull the permit cost more than the cost of the equipment because we needed innovation in the policy work there. It was in a, the original policy just hadn't envisioned this technology. So lots of problems, lots of places to put different types of entrepreneurial energy.
So let's then jump into the entrepreneur question, which is, as you mentioned, this is with any wicked problem, there are hundreds of different ways in different ways that people need to sort of match and exert their energies to sort of push it forward. But obviously, we here at CSI are a very entrepreneurial space, and the work that TAF does is often with entrepreneurs. And so I'm curious, how do you see the role of the entrepreneur within this larger system? There's obviously a whole bunch of other work that has to get done, but entrepreneurs specifically, where do you see them and how can they help?
I think it's a really powerful energy, and it is the role of the low carbon city centers to sort of activate all these resources we have in our community. And we have lots of entrepreneurs doing things, and you guys are doing things too. But it's just about, maybe if we want to take a moment on this pause and reflect kind of thing, I would say one of the things I've observed is sometimes we're not focused on the right problem. And that just takes we're doing some work right now. I just came from a previous meeting at TAF. We're doing some problem definition around a new thing and just slowing it down, not leaping to solutions right away. And you can ask yourself, look, do we want to get rid of plastics in the waste stream? Because then we could really focus entrepreneurially on creating products which use the waste as a feedstock. But then we still have the stuff, we still have the problem in the first place. Or do we want to stop people using single-use plastics so we don't have the waste in the first place? Like, which part do we really need to work on? Because you work really hard on some of these things and realize upstream, the problem is still with you. And so the analysis around problem definition, I think, is really important, and it's something that entrepreneurs can do. And maybe there's some ideas about how we could work together on those kind of things. Entrepreneurs try stuff. They're bold, they're brave, and they can help us learn really fast about things that work and don't work, and can evolve things really quickly to move as we discover what's holding things up. Like we just did generate, and there's electric vehicles are out there. We're trying to push that one, and there's a million different things to play. But one of the things is that it's very inconvenient to charge your car. You pay for your car charging when you're on the road because it's all different kinds of ownership of these stations. We need the Visa card, of EV charging. So that's like an amazing entrepreneurial space, and we are seeing that already being filled. Somebody can figure out that particular thing that moves that obstacle out of the way. So knowing what's needed now, that's kind of, I talked about, it's all intervention points here and there. If we could sort of have the understanding about where we could apply this energy, and I've been thinking about, like, what if we could all be thinking with the 10 challenges, the 10 pesky scale blockers we've seen this year, and then we could put it in and say, guys, help us, people in entrepreneurial space, if you were able to focus on this, then it could really actually proactively move the scale in a really deliberate sort of way. And lots of power there, lots of thinking, out of the box thinking, all the kinds of things we need to make change lives within this community. And if we can get it into the right context, I think it can even be more powerful than it already is.
I love that idea of pesky problems. Let's deal with the pesky problems and get some scale. So
Don't get me started on the list. I mean,
I want to see the list. I want to see the whole list.
no, we're going to get the list.
So I have one last question before we go to some of the other ones. I'm going to again combine two questions, and so I apologize for the complexity. If you need me to repeat any part of it again, please let me know. But you've mentioned that the sort of the entrepreneur, there's a ton of energy, but for scale, there needs to be, in some ways, a table needs to be set. You can have you can throw as much energy as you want into solar, rooftop solar, but if the grid can't accept that energy, you're not going to get the true impact. And so I'm wondering, how we can go about and properly set the table for scale, like what kind of things need to be in place and how that works. Mm-hmm. But then I'm a little more interested in where you sort of see this table already being set. Where, like, if you could just, if you were all powerful and had the ability to just push all of, a whole segment of entrepreneurial energy into a couple segments, like as you mentioned, maybe these problems that you mentioned previously, where do you see the tables currently being set for that opportunity to scale?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it would be so easy if there were just one big table, but as we say, there's no silver bullet.
Hundreds of small tables, maybe.
Yeah, but for example, right now there's a lot of cities in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, and probably in other areas of the country too, are putting out green standards, green building standards. They're trying to get at this problem. Like, we're building these buildings now, but they got to be at zero because we're going to have them. It's like a long-term thing. And so the cities where they can, they're applying standards this way. So it's going to drive a lot of stuff because it's going to be required ultimately. So then there's all kinds of opportunities in that. How do we finance that? How do we build it? Do we have the workforce? And there's entrepreneurial, like there's innovations in design. How do we make it look nice? How do we make it? How do we market this properly? What else can we be doing around? How do we make it affordable? I mean, we could be thinking all around. There's a lever that's going to drive the market driver. It's not a barrier removal. It's a driver, and then it's going to create all kinds of ways to think about together. What could help that be fantastic? What could help that be relevant across different sectors? How could we make this sticky? This great opportunity. How can we create jobs? And so even just that one area of new policy, I think, could be very rich for us to think about how to apply entrepreneurial knowledge. And I think, I had a couple of ideas, like looking at what's coming down the pipe, like getting ahead of the curve so we can sort of see, like, position ourselves to be ready with our ideas. Because sometimes, as we know, as entrepreneurs, it takes a while to kind of try things out. And if we could be doing that, because we kind of know those green standards are coming or whatever, we're going to be ready to get into the market. So working together in a collective, say, to make sure we can scan forward-facing information about trends. That's something we've not been able to have the capacity for at TAF. We're looking with our full cohort of partners across the country to be able to look at that a bit more closely and certainly share it with others. So that leveraging this policy knowledge, this is nerdy stuff. It's all at different levels of government. It's across multiple types of, land use planning, transportation planning, waste management. All kinds of things have bearing and to understand that, it's really big policy institutes, awesome. Pamina, Center for Policy Alternatives, Institute for Municipal Finance and Government, those places have treasures worth of information about how we can orient things. So maybe sharing and the relevance of that. And again, these nuts and bolts challenges, like the 10 pesky problems, like to just define these a bit more. So it's a bit more deliberate work that is, has the reflection in it. I think those are the bigger opportunities. And, we can start with how can we drive benefit out of Toronto, out of green standards across Canada that are emerging now.
Amazing. I love that constant tension between the 10, now 8 years of climate action needed to get to 50% reduction, but also this need to be, take a step back and actually think systemically. It's such a interesting and difficult tension of our time. But I do want to ensure that we have a chance to get to some other questions from our wonderful attendees. Thank you all so much for being here. So Shay, Do you have any questions?
We do. I'm trying my best to kind of combine, merge, address a bunch, and I'm already seeing some positive comments in the chat around like, this has been great, and a lot of the questions that people came with have been addressed, so thanks, Mary and Stefan. Maybe just start a broad question, but like advice for those listening in. So this is from Charlotte. How do we ensure that we're considering the cumulative effects and impacts? So Mary, you noted early on the example of housing, I think entrepreneurial real estate developer. So like Mary's example of housing brings up how the niche housing is linked to the overall system. So maybe just general advice on like what you've learned about measuring or considering cumulative impacts.
Well, there's a measuring part and there's understanding what the opportunities are. So like, and none of the, I guess what I know is I got to work with others. I have to be curious. I have to ask questions. We're struggling now, for example, at Low Carbon Cities Canada. How are we going to, people are like, oh my God, job so hard already. How are we going to apply all these criteria, and are we ever going to find anything to fund ever again? Because I think what I'm saying there is we got to ask the questions like, where do you think this crosses over? And is there any way where does this overlap with, where does retrofitting buildings overlap, meaningfully with provision of affordable housing for vulnerable people? Like we have to talk with our colleagues. I'm not an affordable housing specialist. I'm not a poverty reduction specialist. I've got a link, get out of the silos. So get out of the silos. And maybe it'd be great if we could all cross-appoint each other for 6 months at a time into each other's department and get a sense of what's going on there and where these links lie. We talk about bridging specialists, people who move around. And we talk about bridging in terms of understanding all of this mobilized knowledge we have in colleges and universities. How can we make that practical? Now, the measuring part, I don't know. I mean, I think it's very difficult. We haven't, that's part of what I have to do on Monday is help support my team at Low Carbon Cities Canada with some meaningful metrics in this area. And I don't know. If you know, please message me.
Yeah, it's tough.
With your ideas, be awesome.
Thanks for that. I really love the idea of like seconding ourselves to other organizations and partners, kind of like how you're doing with LC3. Okay, so then shifting a little bit to the role of cities and maybe barriers or limits for cities. How much influence do cities have on changing provincial regulations, for example? Like what happens when you run into barriers? I mean, I've certainly learned over the years of like how much is like downloaded onto cities and yet they have very few like fiscal tools to pay for stuff, for example. So what do you do when you encounter a barrier that is provincial rather than municipal? How much influence do cities have on changing things that are kind of beyond their control?
Yeah, well, there's limitations to the role. When we say cities, first of all, cities, we mean municipalities, municipal government. Do we mean our whole city? Because that's different. And I think my viewpoint is that, municipalities have lots of power and knowledge and resources, but they have limitations too, and that they need to draw on everybody, like we all need to pick it up here, and including the entrepreneurial sector and all the other sectors too, to work together. So I think municipalities need to be really good at animating and inviting participation from their broader communities. And then we have multiple levels of government, like with different types of political leadership. So that's a reality. I've had that my whole career. Like, I guess what you'd say is that sometimes you work where you can. So if it's favorable, you can work at certain levels and influence. I think cities have had a lot of influence on federal policy and have generated very practical ideas. They're right on the ground. They are in charge of some of the very things that we're talking about when it comes to carbon reduction. So they have a really important role, and they interact now internationally as a force, an national and international force through their alliance agencies, including Federation of Canadian Municipalities in Canada. That's a federal advocate for cities. So there's lots of channels that can be used to get, to sort of finesse this multi-level governance and to animate all kinds of different sectors outside of the government sector as well to push this forward.
Thanks for that. Dig where you're standing is one thing that I kind of heard. We have that on the wall at CSI, like start where you are. We all have a role to play. We're all going to encounter limits and barriers, but a question on trying to address a few here, but basically like specific examples, interventions, partnerships. I wonder if, you're working with people all across Canada, and as you've noted, like, things are customized and local by nature, which is awesome. So I think it was Anne noted specific example here in Toronto of a partnership developing between Transform TO and the TDSB. And she asked specifically, like, are such partnerships developing between other municipalities and school boards? But I wonder about broadening that out. Like Andrew also noted, like learning from failings of, for example, like the tower renewal project, or not failing, I shouldn't say like that, but it's been hard. So what I'm getting at is, are there specific examples or innovations or interventions that you've learned about that have been like cool and surprising that you would highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak from TAF's work because I'm not familiar with the nature of the current Transform TO and TDSB relationship. But, TAF works very closely with community housing, Toronto community housing. That's been a long-term. Okay, first of all, it's like, it takes a long time. Okay, these relationships build up over time. There has to be a bit of trust and understanding there. It takes a while to work on things and get to know one another. So that's an investment, and you want to direct that investment carefully. Choose your partners or potential partners carefully. And but I do think it really unlocks a lot of magic. It helps us to understand that we choose to work in that sector because they're a large building owner. So it's a great place to start in order to create scale up afterwards. And it's an important place to start because a lot of vulnerable people are housed in Toronto community housing. We should start there first, if we're going to make improvements associated with retrofits. And we've done some really great work with researchers from the University of Toronto to understand what the indoor air quality impacts are in those buildings and how we can address those during retrofits. And we've also created some new financial tools to help drive that. So this is where I would say that program is a great example of the wraparound innovations we've had to do in partnership, not just with Toronto Community Housing, the building owner, but with the service providers. We had to work on some new procurement elements, some amazing service providers building up, bringing jobs for people with barriers to employment into those projects. It's really just when you start getting at it, there's all these different ways you can think, who am I going to bring into the partnership, what role? And that takes some discipline to think, what are the different needs? Where are the opportunities to bring them together? And it does take some time and effort to work that way, but I really do think the outcomes are enduring and will have more impact.
Thanks for that. So we have a question. So a question for you, Mary, but then I would love to turn this question back to the audience and then build from there with one of the questions that we posed earlier. So the question is, how can LC3, or how is it, how are you planning to support the kind of like boots on the ground work and local community initiatives that are driving local action? So you've talked a bit about that, but that would be a question for you. And then I'm going to paste this in the chat, and I would love to hear from the group too.
The first answer is that the local centers are governed by local people. So I think that's kind of important, that's a way to decide how that local resource is going to be deployed. And so they're also within local organizations, either existing ones, community foundations, a utility, an existing foundation. So they're in different kind of places, and people can access power over your local thing, including, the local municipalities have representation on those boards. So there's governance. That's how we're going to do that, through the general direction. And then there's tools. So there's grants available, and there's going to be direct investment, impact investing in the communities. That's what's intended. It takes a bit of ramp up time, but that's what's intended. And so there could be ways to mobilize different communities through convening, through providing grants, through providing loans. Those are some of the tools that those local centers will have. as they get up and running over the next year or so.
Awesome. So I've just pasted that question in the chat, and then this is new. We haven't tried this before, but then this is our other question for the group. So it's focused a bit on supporting entrepreneurs. So for the 60, 70 people that are on this call, we've got 2 questions in the chat. I've learned this, somebody described this to me as chat storm. So we'll give you a minute. And if you can reflect on either of those questions, begin to type your answer in the chat, but don't yet press send. Another 30 seconds or so. And then we're going to press send all at once in 30 seconds.
I'm really excited. I can't wait to see the storm.
Let's hope. Please do type anything.
Because we need your advice.
We need your advice. Yeah, they want to learn. Okay. Now press send. Okay, we've got a few. Yes, they're coming in. Okay, so I'm noticing I'm going to call some out as we go. So provide networking opportunities, find people working on the same problem, sharing wisdom, stories, networking opportunities. Yeah, I also put kind of share your learnings and report on your failings too. Like, what did you do wrong and that you learned from? Provide opportunities to test prototype solutions in the real world. Align with local animators and guide them on best practices and support. It's kind of like training and learning locally. Lots of like reporting on sharing out your stories. From Jake, entrepreneurs, especially and smaller startups, face an uphill battle getting agreements and contracts signed with cities. Yeah, we hear this a lot. Can LC3 help simplify this process and make access easier for smaller contracts? Procurement's often a nightmare for them. Spread TAF's climate model fund. Okay, I'm not going to try to do this all. This is awesome. Mary, what are you noticing? Yeah, do you want to
be copying all of that?
Okay, cool. Sounds great.
Copying all of that, and I just want to talk about failure. It's very rich, Of course, we have to be honest about that, and it's one of the things that I think Low Carbon Cities Canada centers are going to be equipped to do. Like, it's going to be, we're an entrepreneurial organization, and so that's what we're going to look for is real lessons and pulling those out and getting that information to audience that can make use of it. And procurement issues, as I was saying, a lot of issues are not too glam, but they actually have, if we can focus on them, they really, with entrepreneurial institutional partners, of which there are many, can draw them out too and try to set the stage for access to this entrepreneurial energy, change-making energy. So, yeah. And I guess, for myself, I would say too, I think, this has been a really interesting conversation for me. And I know my LC3 colleagues will be interested to hear the outcomes too. And I wonder if there's appetite to continue this conversation and how we might do that. So maybe I'll end with my own question there.
Oh, yes. We can support that. That's what we do.
Yes, we would love to.
Stefan, I think, has one more question for you.
I do, and I do want to let folks know that we are actually going to be pulling the questions from the chat, or the answers you have in the chat, and sharing them back with Mary. So please, as this last question goes, and please do keep answering them, because all of this information is super valuable for both us and LC3. But the last question is a question we ask everyone, which really is just, is there anything that we missed that you would like to say in closing? Open floor, really. And again, as Mary Ann says, please, folks, if you do have any other thoughts on the questions, please answer in the chat.
Really, I just feel like there's something we could just do a lot better if we work together. And it's not like we don't work together. As I said before, we've been having interaction, and it's been really positive. Ever since we did our first climate venture program in 2011. So we have learned a lot. But let's keep trying to unlock these possibilities together, because we need every shred, everybody on deck. And this isn't something that happens alone. This is just, we've got to all be trying to pull in the same direction, not in the same way necessarily, bringing different talents in, but this is about mobilizing the energy and the ideas we need to really jump ourselves into this new phase. And it's going to be much better. It's going to be low carbon, and there'll be lots of other benefits too. And I think it can, let's create this exciting vision together.
A wonderful note to end on. Thank you,
For sure.
Mary. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you,
everyone for being here.
And everybody,
Yeah.
I look forward to your notes. I will be poring over them. Thank you.
Awesome. And we'll be back with another Climate Ventures Conversations on Tuesday, April 20th. I'll email you a link to that. It's with Dr. Melissa Lem, based out of BC, who works with the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. And I'll be talking with her. So yeah, thanks so much for today, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.